looks like it's 5:30. We will call the meeting to order of the policy committee. If everyone would stand for the pledge of allegiance. Here. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome to the policy committee meeting. I'll introduce everyone. To narrate, we have Jeremy Motz, who is our legal counsel. We have Mr. Hamka to talk about enrollment in personnel, human resources type of stuff in that vein. We have Dr. Delgado, acting superintendent, Dr. Roy Bishop. I'm Valarie St. John, trustee and chair of the policy committee. This is President Clint Derringer and trustee Laura Hall. So we can just get right into it since it's a pretty light agenda for today. Our first item, does anybody have any issues with the agenda? We're not officially voting, just making sure. So the first item is a policy discussion on board member compensation 1.17. And Dr. Bishop did make sure that we had a printed copy of the policy here. And if you'll notice, our policy does not say anything about directing your compensation. It's just you get $30 each meeting. You can refuse it in writing to the superintendent, but there's nothing about directing it to specific organizations within the school. And Dr. Bishop and I were talking about that. Where are we getting this idea? And apparently the Viola handbook that got rid of 5 or 6 years ago? Okay, so 4 years ago, had that policy to be able to direct our compensation to organizations within the school district. But when we switched to our new handbook, our new policy manual, that didn't carry over. So the policy has actually been 1.17 as you see it here, and moving forward. So this is just an FYI, it doesn't need to be approved because it was already approved by the board 4 years ago. But moving forward, especially for President Derringer's benefit, especially if you continue in the role next year, that's the policy. There's no directing of funds. And that should also help with tax, tax records. I guess that was an issue of whether we were contractors or actually being paid or not. So, did you have anything further on that, Dr. Bishop?
The only thing I wanted to add, since we did discover that it was in the other policy that was being followed and we don't have any of the guidance, I know I was speaking with Mr. Motz, it's around how do some other districts handle funding, but we also come up with like some things we probably will need to talk about here as far as like in January, what does that look like for board member compensation? So, Mr. Motz, would you mind kind of like just giving us a little bit of information as far as how that could look for us, especially from a tax perspective, how it probably be best to be able to determine from board member compensation, how to be able to give it, and if they want to give it back to us, what that would look like?
Yeah, I think the best way to go about it, you're looking at a lot of this, first it's like, you're looking at waiver, sort of, board members can always, although it's not in the revised school code as it relates to general policy school districts as Grosse Pointe is, it doesn't really speak to directly. It's interesting, some of the other language on compensations in some other areas of the revised school code, which are to ISDs in first-class school districts. But board members can always waive compensation. They just don't want to say, I don't want to get it at all, which is, you always can do that. And you can take that to the board and waive that. But if you are going to accept the compensation from a standpoint of procedurally, generally, if the board member wants to make a donation, it's generally paid the money's paid to the board member, and then if they want to make a donation back, then they make a donation back to however they want to do it in the manners of we've looked at our policies in prior meetings with respect to donations and the like, and they would make it in that manner. They could direct it to a specific, the donation to a specific fund or a specific program, and they can do it that way. That's generally, from that standpoint, then your records of making the payment and then getting the donation back are a little bit cleaner with respect to allocating where the money's going.
So in your opinion, since we've already declared how we'd like our compensation directed for the year, we probably shouldn't change in the middle of the year for tax purposes either, right?
I think from that standpoint, I think a good one there would be, as I mentioned before, is we want to we could probably check with your auditors to make sure that it would be keeping it on the same track, as we've already started half the
Mhm.
year. And we always like to look at, I always like to confer with the auditors if we're gonna change something midstream to make sure that it's not gonna mess up anything that they're handling.
Right.
So that's always like a good step to double check that. So I think, a lot of times if you've already started down a path is to keep it that way. But if the auditors are saying, well, no, we can change it now, and that'd be a better course of action to do, I always like to rely on them when we're trying to switch stuff right in the middle of the year. But that's, cause part of it is board members' year is January to January to December, and then the school district's fiscal year is July 1. So you guys always operate on, your term years are January, or calendar years, and then the school district's fiscal year is July. So how they account for things. So that's always something to check with the auditors. I think we can bounce that off of them just to verify, if they're okay with just keeping it moving forward as is for the rest of your term year, which would go through December.
For the remainder of calendar year
Yeah.
2026. Dr. Bishop, is that easy enough for you to ask, just as a question, and make sure that we're okay? Because I would not like to make a big issue of this at a board meeting, just because we already made the declarations
Yeah.
in January, as we usually do. I'd like to start doing things correctly next year if possible. But if the auditors are saying that we need to change it as soon as possible for tax record keeping, then we can do that as well.
I'm hopeful that they'll be okay with keeping it on, but I always like to double check, because they're the ones that actually have to sign off at the end on all of it, so a
Sure.
lot of money spent, so.
All right, that's a good flag for that. Any other questions about the board member conversations policy?
It was just noted that it said that there will be reconciliation of the earnings provided to each board member biannually. Have we seen those? I don't remember seeing that for past.
I can double check and be able to see. That's something else I can follow up on.
Yeah, I guess I would assume that's within the finance office, but that's a good question. Should the board be seeing that as part of the financial updates?
Or just, it's just to each board member saying, I think it's
Individually.
kind of, that's what it seemed, that's how I read it as.
Okay.
I had that question about this reconciliation statement. It would be a good follow-up to understand, or at least provide that now to each board member where everything stands. I know, I can certainly appreciate the motivation of not trying to create a mountain out of a molehill, but this has already kind of garnered some additional attention in previous meetings. So whatever is the best way forward, especially given that we are crossing the fiscal year kind of boundary
Yeah.
at the end of June, beginning of July, in our next meeting, there is some alignment. It would be, it'd be useful to probably understand all of the moving parts and then get the full package of information to each trustee or to all the trustees, and then decide together if we should move forward at the fiscal year changeover or wait until January. I think we could probably handle that across the board, but I think the questions are already swirling. There are already questions about board member compensation that have come up recently, so we should probably just tackle it. That's my suggestion, just in terms of taking it to the full board.
Okay.
So would you like to put this on the agenda for the next board meeting, just as a discussion point, not anything that we need to vote on, because this has been the policy for the past 4 years?
Right, I think there should be some open discussion about it. I would put it onto the first read section of the next agenda, probably vote on it in August.
Well, I don't think there's any
recommendation,
okay.
but again, we have to start the conversation and see, what are the moving parts?
Yeah, if there would only be a vote if there needed to be something to change.
And because we declared
Yeah.
our intent in January, technically under the wrong policy,
Yeah.
right, there is some alignment that needs to happen,
Yeah.
whether it's a voting issue or not. So
Okay.
let's start that conversation and figure out whether there's an action item there or not before the July 27th meeting. That's what I would prefer in terms of carrying this to the full meeting.
That's fine.
If we had to change it because of the auditors, we would have to rewrite the policy and make it says dates in here, so.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on what they say.
I can find out from them.
Anything further on that?
Well, I think the dates would be okay here, because it goes on your term year, so January 15th, it'll be right when you start, those would still stay.
Okay,
Yeah, I was just more of, if we're gonna make a change mid-year, is checking with the auditors, because your term year is in the middle of your year, fiscal year, the financial year of the district is ending. So we just wanna make sure that there's no need to realign, or we can just continue on with the process on the declaration from January, carry that out through your term, your calendar year, and then on January of next year, get everything else.
okay.
We'll check with them on that.
Alright. Moving on to 2.2 is discussion on our enrollment administrative guidelines to ensure that they're being followed consistently, and also I know we've discussed possibly streamlining some of this, making it a little easier for our enrollment office to determine whether a student is eligible, because that's some feedback that I've gotten from parents, is that the enrollment process is very difficult and might be pushing some families away. So, Dr. Bishop.
Absolutely, and I appreciate it. It's actually why I had a chance to bring Mr. Hamka to the table today. We talk about it. That's definitely one of the areas he will be overseeing in the very near future. The reason why I have it on here to be discussing that is because I talked to several trustees about the enrollment process in the last couple of months, and some things I'm hearing is how can we make sure it's more welcoming? How can we make sure that we're still holding the line when we need to, when certain things may not be, when something may fall kind of like outside of some of the administrative guidelines as far as documents or just overall situations that may be different from what may be highlighted in here. We need to have an overall process of how we can make sure that families feel welcome, number one, but they also understand that we're happy that they're here, because it also goes right along our strategic plan, especially goal number 2, where we talk about our culture, specifically when we talk about enrollment. Getting as many people in our school district as possible. We don't want to deter anyone based upon some things in here that may not be clear. So, Mr. Hamka, once again, systematic thinking in which how he does some things, has some really good ideas as far as for within the system, what we can do when discrepancies come up, but also how we interpret the policy is important. So I want to kick it over to him for a second, that way he can kind of tell us, based upon some of the things that he's already seen within the administrative guideline 4.01, what some of those things look like, what may come up, and when they do come up, how can we make sure not only do our families feel seen and heard, but their problems that they may have are addressed within a timely fashion, and hopefully we can get to the point where their children or their child can come into our school district and have a chance to receive an education. So Mr. Hamka, I'm gonna kick it over to you.
So I think we're in the human business, right? And I think one of the things that's happened over the years is through technology, we've become less forward-facing, less face-to-face contact. A lot of what is happening does happen digitally. And so I think, in looking at what we do, there's a great opportunity to invite people, especially if at times the paperwork is not in order, and we have to let them know, at this time, you're not approved for enrollment. So what could an appeal process look like? What could we do to invite people and have a face-to-face meeting with them, walk them through exactly what is not in order, and help them better understand what they need to do to get that in order, right? Or at times where if they're not eligible, explain that to them. Also potentially, certainly working with Dr. Bishop, but could we create some type of a 30-day window where at times there's like paperwork that's contested? Maybe it's legal paperwork. Maybe we have an adoption, and the adoption paperwork isn't totally cleared yet, but we have some preliminary work, maybe from a court order, where things are not yet finalized. Could we create a window where we give a 30-day review window and allow them to come in with some type of a contract? Right, where they agree that during this 30-day window, they're to get, paperwork in order, but then also talking about what would happen at the end of the window. Do we potentially explore a tuition model for them to stay, or option to leave? Right, we don't want to be kids, we don't want kids that be coming and going, right? We recognize how hard that is on them, and at times we have an adult issue with paperwork. But at the same, we want to uphold what is in the policies and make sure we're enrolling the students who are eligible to enroll. So there's certainly an opportunity for more of that human touch with this, sitting down with people and working with them.
said. I think Ms. Hamka, during our initial conversations, we also talked about potentially if a family is denied to be able to enroll, in that letter that they receive, they will have a chance to
Appeal.
connect
Yeah,
and appeal,
absolutely,
kind of know the reasoning why, right? And then kind of building that format. I think also one thing now we'll do is because sometimes we often have to connect with the legal around some of the things. I think when we are able to build that database, especially based upon case studies about what we are experiencing within enrollment, that'll give us information that we need to keep some things in-house when it comes to reviewing those documents. So
Including that in the letter very specifically, like, you know, you weren't approved, however, here's an appeal process if you'd like, spell that out. And then maybe put a window of time where they can come in and meet with us, so we can walk them through it.
absolutely, and our central theme is we're happy you're here. So when families are coming and they don't have a chance to be able to enroll with us, we want them to be able to know, you know what, they walked through the process, they did everything with fidelity, they tried their best, they might not like our answer of no, but at the same time, they felt they were treated with respect, they feel like the information was clear, and they had a chance to be able to go somewhere even for an appeal process before they understood that, you know, this was not gonna be an opportunity, unfortunately, for them.
And just to be clear, students who live in the district are eligible to enroll. There's not, the answer's not going to be no if the student lives in the district. It's just sometimes a problem of getting the paperwork to prove that, especially if you just moved in, you don't have your utilities set up yet, and things like that. So I like the 30-day window for the students who, you know, at least have some documentation that shows that they're here, and then to make sure that the parents bring in the 2 utility bills within 30 days, to make sure that they don't miss any days of their education, because paperwork is difficult.
You bring up a good point, like, we don't want students to miss any days of school, because we know we see a direct correlation of when students miss school, it impacts them in multiple ways, especially as it relates to academics. We do want the adult situation, as far as the parents to have everything that they need to be able to check the right boxes to have the children come in to our school system. And there's multiple ways for children who are in GP to be enrolled. And sometimes students may be, we can't even tell, they may be homeless, they may be staying with the host family. So depending on the situation of the child and the family and the warranty, the deed, or versus someone leasing the home, or we even had a situation the other day where someone is now renting something, but the rental doesn't start until 120 days out. So that's a very different situation. And so like we're looking at a case by case basis, how can we make sure we're supporting this child who needs to be educated? How can we also make sure that we are not getting told information that may not be true? So we have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence every step of the way to make sure our families are welcome, but they're also, you know, families that are also in GP. That's a fine balance.
You know,
Yeah, we're not a school of choice district, so they have to be residents here, but we wanna make sure that any resident here who wants to enroll is able to do so, even if their parents are divorced or they're adopted, or, you know, the uncle is the one who owns all the house and the utilities or something. There should be multiple pathways to prove that you live here.
And there are multiple pathways to prove that, the AG does
Yes.
specify that. And so, you know, we'll make sure that we're implementing it with fidelity and with kindness, right? I think the two are not mutually exclusive. We could do both. And I think when we get into the 120-day piece out, we had someone closing the other day where they weren't gonna take occupancy for over 100 days. How do you now then verify that that indeed took place?
Yeah, because they don't have the utilities. and
Because
everything.
they're currently not a resident. They're potentially going to be a future resident. Right, and so I think that is, you know, that's a fine balance, but we're something that we will definitely work on.
Yeah. So to be clear, we're not looking to change anything in the AG, but just to make sure specifically that Mr. Hamka has the responsibility of making sure our enrollment office is trained and knows all these different pathways to prove residency, but also if parents are getting frustrated with the process and feel I've given you all the paperwork and I don't understand why it's not right, they will have the opportunity to meet with you instead of just being told, no, you can't. A letter will be sent saying.
That is one of our goals, customer service. We'll make sure we're having those touches with families.
The one thing is just to be, was we highlight, appreciate the idea of I'll call it conditional enrollment, you know, like, hey, you've got this paperwork in, you just gotta verify it, we wanna be mindful, is when we look at that, I think we're definitely gonna wanna run a case-by-case basis, and we wanna, if we're gonna just say blanket, oh, you've got your stuff in, you can come to school, because there are some things, I know it's under the schools of choice legislation, once you enroll the kid, you have to allow them to stay, continue to enroll, you can't, not a school choice, so we wanna make sure we don't give them an enrollment, and then like, oh, well, sorry, you now, if it's enrollment fraud, and there's things like that, as that sort of false hope, we wanna make sure, that might be a case by case, we're not saying, oh, yeah, you're definitely in, you're just gonna pick this stuff up, because if they never get us that stuff, now we have to work to, remove the student because of enrollment, because they don't live here, they don't fit any of the exceptions. So, that one was, wanna make sure that we're thoughtful as we work through that for a case by case, to make sure that, that 120 days out, we verify that the closing occurred and actually moved in and all that stuff. We'll have to make sure that we figure out a good path for that, instead of like a blanket rule.
And also, we also don't wanna hurt the student in the process, because a lot of times it's not really their choice, it's not really their situation.
It's not their problem.
It's not their problem, so we're trying to take these adult situations, and how can they not negatively impact the students that are in the middle of it? And that's a hard process when a student does start, and it's like, I'm very sorry, but unfortunately you can't go here after they've developed relationships, and that's a really hard thing to watch.
Yeah, we definitely don't want that, and that shouldn't be happening unless someone has been misrepresenting their residency, right?
Correct.
So, as long as we can do our best to perceive that before it happens. Any other questions about that from trustees?
No, I mean, we're looking at a small portion of
Correct.
people that this is affecting, and it's just to make sure, in most cases, it is gonna be, I mean, rarely it would be where they're misrepresenting themselves, and at that point, that's a bigger issue outside of this policy, so.
Sure, it's a small portion, but we are hearing from multiple stakeholders around the process could potentially be better, right? So we do wanna make sure to listen to that feedback and find out how we can make it better based upon either customer service and or how you were told, no, that's all we can control.
Right.
The answer still might be no.
Right,
Right,
but it
but
doesn't
how-
have to be.
How they feel throughout that process is gonna be very important to us.
I would reiterate that a big part of culture is first impression. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression, and our enrollment office is certainly kind of our front porch, so to speak. I have 3 questions. First, from a high level, how many people or is there an FTE, a personnel kind of human resource burden on enrollment reviews and the system that is implemented there? Is this something that you feel is kind of a mature system, or something that you're gonna be reviewing and updating probably sometime soon?
We need to review it and update it, because, quite frankly, right now, we have one person that is in enrollment in the residence, and we have also the pupil account that is also attached to the enrollment process, so we need to look and review that, especially when it comes to communication and other things, so we're going through that right now in that position. It's currently open, and we're working with the union to properly define what we would like that individual to do, so we're negotiating that right now.
Okay, great. My second question is under letter F, the homeless student. It says, proof establishing homelessness as defined by law. What is the proof of being homeless as defined by law?
Under McKinney-Vento, how's the best way to explain that definition? They have to establish, they use some interesting words. They essentially have to establish that they have no permanent residence. Probably the Cliff Notes version of the long-winded definition. And they can do that in many different ways. That they establish that they have no permanent residence, yet that they can essentially be transient. And they could demonstrate that they're living in a shelter, that gets still considered homeless, even though they might have a place to go every night, but that's not theirs. That they can show that they have no place. They're not even living in a shelter. They have no place to live. And then you go where there's different ways to establish it, but that's really, they have no permanent residence that they have established, and we can demonstrate that in several different ways.
And Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, when a student is declared to be homeless on McKinney-Vento, we're on a limited time restraint to be able to get them in schools.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
like, once we have that information, sometimes we don't necessarily have all the information that we need, but by law, we have to make sure that student
Yeah.
gets enrolled at some point in a very timely fashion to our school district, because they are deemed to be homeless. So we do have a McKinney-Vento, a homeless liaison,
Yeah.
who does help us with that, to be able to determine and help families go out that process. I just wanna make sure
It's
we're clear about that.
basically like within a week or two, so you really have to move quickly for them. And then they also have, even if they become transient and maybe go and they're homeless outside of the district, if you're the district of residence, or the district of origin, excuse me, I don't want to confuse with residence. District of origin is the McKinney-Vento. You still have to go get them and allow them to come back in your district, even though they may be in a homeless shelter that's outside of your boundaries. If they established they were coming to school, you're the district of origin, once you have that, you then have to go get them and bring them back and you get to continue on with the district.
So that's a good point. Also, students who are classified as McKinney-Vento also are given the right of transportation. So we do have services to be able to get them to and from school when they're homeless.
Right, so the second or the third kind of clause there, to the satisfaction of the district, that's the homeless liaison position that we talk about at the board on an annual basis.
Yeah.
That is the person who, that is the satisfaction of that person.
Correct.
That's who represents the district in those cases.
Correct. So for Claire, it's also the third person connected to the enrollment process.
Got it, thank you. And then on letter D, category 4, it says if a student is 16, we require the driver's license. There's not a requirement for a 16-year-old kid to get their driver's license. So there's no if in the language there, right? If the student is 16, but that's not a given that the student has a driver's license when they're 16.
So I should say, or state ID.
They do get a state ID, don't they, at 16, or is that not required?
I don't think it's required, but if you're traveling,
You-
they can
you
ask
can-
anybody over
yeah.
16.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. I don't know if every student has one.
Right, they
Yeah.
might not have it.
You know, but
Should they-
yeah, I think we look into, that was D3, correct?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Let's revisit that one.
there's no or involved, right? Because
Right.
before the colon there, it says all of the following.
Yeah.
Right,
Definitely is.
That's a
Good point.
that's a pretty steep barrier that would be pretty easy to miss. It would be frustrating, if it was my kid.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm sure we would have accepted a state ID as well, but that should be, or are you saying no ID for a student who's 16 or 17 should be required?
I think it just should be clear.
Okay.
If we're gonna require a state issued ID, it should say that, right? But it's not, if a kid can't pass the driving test, I don't
Yeah.
understand why
Yeah, they
that
wouldn't
would
be
stop
able
them
to-
from coming to school,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
Like if they can't get the driver's license as opposed to a state issued ID, whatever we're trying to accomplish, it should be.
It should say or state ID.
Driver's license is like.
Yeah, we can add the word state ID. We can also look at, if they've obtained either one, you don't have to get either of them, so we could also, so that could be almost like, we would like them, but if they can demonstrate they don't have them and they haven't gotten them, we could also look at it from different angles. So it's not that you're requiring them to have it, but.
Right. If it's an option as a pathway, I think it's perfectly fine, but it's pretty clear to me with the language when it says all of the following, that one particular issue could tank your eligibility, and that would be a problem.
And when we read it, the interesting part also is, so if I'm 15, I don't need it.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I'm, so like, it's a conditional piece.
Right.
So if I'm 15, I don't need it, but if I'm
Right.
16, I do need it.
It seems like we wanna validate that that kid is
It's
who they
really
say
good.
that kid is,
Yeah.
which is certainly reasonable, but there are other options to do it, and it's very specific
Well, I
to say
think
driver's
that's a more standardized piece of data versus 1 and 2, which are just like statements
Mhm.
made by somebody. So I see why that piece is there, and I almost think it would need to be stricter in a way, say like that third one would need to be the parent or the guardian's ID if it wasn't the student's ID. Like
Well,
that's
for,
the issue.
for that one, the parent or guardian does not live in the
For the
district.
host then, you would have to show
Sure,
that
then
the
that-
host does, I would think.
Well, that's be a family member. This is
Well, they
actually a
still-
statutory exception under the school code.
Yeah, the
Okay.
standard proof of residency is still required for the
Yeah.
host.
Okay,
So
so then
they,
that
they
takes care
say
of
that, yeah.
So the host would still need all of number 1,
Mhm.
category 1 over
Right.
here. And then in addition to that, you'd get 1, 2, and 3.
I see. I think it's kind of there, at least I'm reading backwards of it, thinking it's a grandparent that lives here and they're not just trying to say, oh, we're just gonna use grandma's address to come in and do that. So by having the student's ID on there
Right.
that shows that.
If their address
That's
is in our
right.
district bounds, then we're
So I
also.
see why it's there, I see why it's limiting to only see the driver's license, but I also think it's an
Yeah,
important
the
piece.
statements are more to establish under the school code provision is that it's for a suitable home.
Right.
You're not doing
Not
it
for
because you want
school.
to play on the football team.
Mhm.
You're not doing it,
You're doing it because the parent
yeah.
or guardian can't take care of
The
it.
parent or guardian that lives outside of the district, it does not have the means to take care of them, and that's the way that the provision is, so that's where you want those statements from a parent, that there's no suitable home where they actually reside, and this is the only, really option is going to the host, or there has to be a family member, that they're living with.
Right.
Do you need, board approval to simply add or state issued ID or otherwise clarify, D3? Or since it's an administrative guideline, does the administration feel comfortable with just changing that on your own?
I'm gonna look into, what our policies say around administrative guidelines, I believe AGs do have to go, to the board now,
Yeah,
so.
so AG's under the way you guys revise the policies, AGs do go to the board, but I think for purposes of, if this is something that comes up between now and say July 27th, I think is the next meeting, and if we need to look at it, we probably wanna, if it's not required of the driver's license, if the kid doesn't have one,
Mhm.
and then maybe go to that as we look at the change, making the change.
Just for clarity, we do change something that needs to go.
Yeah, if you change something in the AG's policy, does say that all those have to go to the board.
Which then opens up a lot of discussion, because there's a lot of pieces here, so that could be a big.
Yeah.
Like, if this issue were to come up in the next month, before the next board meeting, and we needed to take action, it would be more, well, if the kid does not have a driver's license and hasn't passed the test, or can't pass the driving test, and doesn't have a driver's license, but we need to work through that statute, we have to make a determination, this is still before school starts, so we still have some time, but, if they wanna do a first read and a second read, now we're getting towards August, and it's getting a little closer when school starts, so just be mindful how we have to work through that one.
So TBD on that, Dr. Bishop, you can let me know, let President Derringer know if you want that on the next agenda, or if we wanna keep it as is. Any more on enrolling eligible students?
No, that was my 3 questions.
Alright, and then 2.3 is review of high school handbooks.
Absolutely, so, like we talked about earlier, we do have, a handbook task list. Now, Dr. Delgado, she's with us tonight, gonna talk to us a little bit about the high school handbooks. We are doing everything in our power to make sure that we're having high expectations for our students. And we're also going through our materials to make sure those high expectations for all students are consistent across schools. So part of that is looking at what we are expecting from students in print. So Dr. Delgado's been working with both of our high school principals, along with other individuals, to see what does that alignment look like all the way from pre-K to 12th grade. So I'm gonna have her walk through some very rough drafts. You're gonna see within these that there's some things I kind of blocked out, some things we're still working through. I want you to kind of like to see where we are heading at. So if you had any questions about anything as it relates to both of our high schools, you have a chance to be able to ask. But we did want to make sure that you know that we were working on this and what the intent was behind it. Whereas we're not lowering the standards for anybody. We're maintaining high expectations for everybody. We're making sure they're clear across the board, so no matter what school you're at, Atari is this. This is what an absence looks like. This is how many absences, get you this consequence. So we just wanted to be clear with everybody around that.
And I know you wanted to, do all the high school handbook changes at the same time, but did you want that before the school year starts?
Yeah, we have to have it before the school year starts, like we're working on that now. We have a couple more pieces that our principals are still working on with different people inside the school, but yes, we will need to bring that back before the school year starts.
Okay, so probably for a first read at the July meeting, and then if you need to make some changes in between the July and August meeting, that's all right.
Yeah, we'll have it returned,
Okay.
along with elementary and also middle.
Elementary and middle are also they're in progress. But, high school, we started a little earlier, we started back, in the spring, and so, to be honest, these are actually pretty good to go. It's just that we didn't remove the strikeouts or add the red text prior to bringing it here, because we wanted you all to be able to see what the, high school principals had decided was no longer necessary. you'll see there's some text that is in strikeout mode throughout the drafts, but they didn't wanna just strike it out without you having the opportunity to see what they were planning to strike out. And then any text in red is additions. So, you'll have an opportunity, obviously, after tonight to review and provide feedback if you think if you have questions about why they chose to strike out any of the areas. For the most part, anything that is proposed to be struck out is either policies that they no longer enact, they're just older, that they're really no longer following, or things that were not consistent. And then they came together and decided, should we enact these at both schools, or should we remove it from the school that had it listed?
I think when you're talking about policies that are no longer active, we're also talking about some of those other yellow policies.
Correct.
So we're going through across the board, looking at some of those that kind of didn't get in the full sweep when we did it in 2022.
Absolutely. I just made some high-level notes of some of the big ones. I love that they both decided that instead of just having a cover page at the front of their handbook, they wanted to start it out with a letter from the administration to the students and families, just kind of explaining the purpose and the spirit behind the handbook. So obviously those are different depending on the school, but they have the same spirit, the same purpose. One of the things that you'll notice throughout the handbooks is there were several areas where specific consequences were mentioned for actions. Like, for example, I think it might have been in the area under dances. It said something about if certain behaviors were enacted, it would be a 5-day suspension. They chose to remove that language and just put that discipline would be administered in line with the code of conduct. So that way they were able to fall back to the code of conduct, which has also been board approved, to administer the discipline versus having to comply with a certain number that was written into the handbook. So they've changed some of those. Some of them were pretty simple changes, like for example, under the section on smoking and consequences provided for that, they added vaping, because I think probably the last time we updated that, vaping wasn't as big of an issue as it is these days. And so there's some other additions you'll see in the red text with regard to graduation requirements, because you might recall for our current juniors, our incoming juniors, are the first class to have that personal finance requirement as part of their graduation requirement, so they actually have an extra 0.5 credit that is required for them, so that had not been added to the handbooks yet. So they went through and added that in. There is one part that's pending in here, and that is the personal communication devices portion, because they will update that after board approval in July. So you'll see as you go through there, it has it kind of marked off, but it says pending board approval. There is a section that I thought was important to point out about lunch that has been added. And that is because, based on our conversations earlier this year about the fact that we are going to maintain an open campus for lunch, we are planning to add a part into our online pre-registration that goes out in August for all families, where the families opt in to allowing their students to leave campus for lunch. We're looking at that as a liability portion to protect ourselves as a district, since we are maintaining that open campus. And so they added language around that to the handbooks. Those were the big changes. A lot of the other things were more just grammatical or stylistic or alignment to each other. So.
And there are a couple things that I noticed that I really appreciated. There's mention of the strategic plan throughout the process. It's also mentioned our safety procedures that are in there to be clear, as far as like how many tornado drills, fire drills we have every year, what that process looks like. ID cards must be carried because, as you know, within the opt-in, opt-out process, we're having students make sure they kind of scan when they come back in, that we're kind of collecting that, and we're still going through that process.
My question, do we have that system in place where they can badge in and out for lunch?
I believe the items will get dropped off, I believe, in July at some point in time.
We can't process the PO until after July 1st for the new budget year, and so, yes, they're not here yet.
Yeah, and then we have to work out logistically, like, what does that look like, right? It's great in theory to us, right? But there's like some logistical features, like how do you?
Yeah, you don't want the bottleneck.
We're a little curious about the bottleneck and how that's gonna work.
How do you funnel all the students into the school, when usually it's like see a point, so we're trying to figure out what that looks like, logistically, so I appreciate those items also being added in you and the team, especially the administrators along with you. They did, but I just want to be clear once again, this is not, what I really love about it is like, each book still has its own flair.
Sure.
Like South still has and maintains their style, and so does yours. But the expectations are high for everyone, and that's important.
I'm sorry, one other piece I do want to point out as I'm scrolling through and reminding myself of some of the strikeouts is several things that were listed in these handbooks are also duplicated in the program of studies. And so we decided to allow those things to live in the program of studies. We decided to allow the items around consequences to live in the code of conduct. And so that was the decision why some of these things about, credit transfers and things like that, those already live in the program of studies. And so they reference the program of studies and where you can find those pieces in here. Because I think when you have them live in two places, if one is updated, you run the risk of the other not being updated and then them not matching, so.
And then that's how we end up following the yellow policies for extra years. All right, and since we just got these revised handbooks today, I assume, there's not a lot of discussion about it, but we'll make sure to read them well before the board meeting. And it'll be a first read for the student handbooks at the July meeting? Okay. Because my understanding is also we do not want to have a July policy committee meeting.
Correct.
Okay. So we'll go straight to the board for that one without a whole lot of discussion unless, my colleagues have particular things that they're noticing.
I have two questions.
Sure.
The South handbook, page 25, were we striking the specific 5 days suspension from that dance section?
Yes, that was where they wanted to replace the language to say that consequences will be administered according to the code of conduct.
Yeah, that edit is reflected on the north.
It's not in the south?
It is not in the south.
Thank you for that, I'll be sure that.
Mhm. And is this the place that we would go to look for opportunities for like dual enrollment or other opportunities where kids can take college credits perhaps at the community college, or is that program of studies?
Program of studies.
Okay.
Mhm.
Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
We'll make sure to review these carefully before the board meeting and, maybe draw out the other.
Mhm. Okay, now I'll make that so we can align this. Mhm. Nodding right there, okay. That's both under dances, right?
Page 25.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a lot of discussion on tap for the next board meeting. We'll discuss policy 1.17. We might discuss the administrative guideline on enrollment and eligible students if the administration would like to change that one line. And then we'll be looking at all level handbooks or just high school for the July meeting.
I'm looking for all.
All done.
Okay, so we'll have a lot of reading to do for our regular board meeting in July, but it's good that we're making sure this is all streamlined for our students. So now we have the opportunity for public comments. If you would like to make a comment, please stand up and you have your minutes. Go ahead.
Dick Schroeder, Grosse Pointe Park. I'm assuming when you make a policy, you're planning on following the policies, and they're just not things on paper. A friend of mine sent an email to the school system, and Rebecca Fannin answered it about what happened at Mary the other day, and says, was a facility use application submitted for this event? Was it approved by the building principal and the deputy superintendent of business services in accordance with policy 8.06? Answer, yes. Under which of the 4 users were the classifications of the event approved? And it said, welcome everyone, Grosse Pointe is categorized as a class 3 nonprofit. Did the district, in reviewing the application, have any knowledge in advance that the event would include drag performances staged in close proximity to young children? And if so, was any consideration given to the appropriateness of that content for an audience that would include children as young as 4? The application only states it is a Grosse Pointe Pride event hosted by Welcoming Everyone Grosse Pointe. All children brought to this event was outside of school hours in school year, and they were brought by their parents. And then it says 8.06 requires that the school principal must approve any decorations erected in connection with permitted use, who approved the events staged and placards and were posted on district fencing, and was that approval documented as policy requires? Banner approval was made and documented by our team that reviews all banners. So you had an organization that was dishonest in their application. They did not put in their application that there was going to be drag queens dancing in front of young children. I think that in itself should prevent this group from ever again having any event on any of our schools. But the problem that I see here was that there was also a building principal who was responsible for looking at these signage, and she didn't catch that there were drag queens having a presentation. So she wasn't following policy, or she saw it and said, oh, this is fine, or she didn't look at the application where there was nothing posted about drag queens, and this was an after the fact thing. So there's no policy at all that was followed about this, and you guys just got done talking about it. Pardon me?
I said, thank you.
No, that's not 3 minutes.
Yes, it is. I can see the clock right behind you. Do we have any committee member comments?
I'm sorry. The team that did the work on the handbooks, I like the alignment, that it doesn't just say north and south, it comes down to GBSS. I think that is good. It goes to show that it's the same in both too, so.
I just want to reiterate that there are plenty of opportunities for us to disagree about the content of what is happening in and around our schools. You know, if there are problems that we need to solve, these are the types of meetings that we should be trying to solve problems. And if we can anchor all of our work there, then it's certainly much more productive. And typically, these meetings are very productive, and I appreciate that from the administration, leadership, and our partners, our law partners, and their whole administrative team. So again, thank you guys for bringing forward all of those disagreements and issues and working through them openly and honestly, because it's only going to ramp up from here, I think, through the summer and through the fall. So I hope that we are willing and capable of meeting the challenge of trying to stay anchored in solving problems and improving our district and our systems for community members and for the students ultimately. So I appreciate you guys that are up here, and we will certainly continue to look at all of our policies and make sure that they are implemented. And when we find issues, as we have on this agenda, we will we'll bring them forward and try to tackle them and make corrections and bring those to the full board, as always. So thank you guys.
Do any of our administrators have final comments?
Okay.
One comment I have is that I don't normally comment on public comments that are said, but it's also my job to make sure not only do I hold people accountable, but also support people as well. And so I just want to be clear as far as when our building administrators and their team approve events, they're approving just the space is available on that particular day. So like having a chance to go to visit Mary Day to check on everybody, I don't think sometimes we think about the impact it has on everyone else. And so I think it's important for us, especially our vernacular and our words, to make sure people not only have our support, but they also know that the intent of our individuals who work here are not negative by any means. So I just want us to make sure, and I want our principals to make sure that, yes, we hold people accountable when things happen, but we also are here to support them and support community throughout the way. And that is our goal, and that will always continue to be our fight. We have no problem with anyone else trying to hold you accountable. I think it's important for us to make sure that our administrators know that they are supported.
Thanks.
And to that end, I really appreciate how much the review of these handbooks is looking at what's going to be best for our students, and remembering that some of the policies that we have, if we forget to update them or don't have them aligned, can have a negative impact on students. So I am very grateful for the work that our administrators and staff have done to make sure that these all align and that it's in the spirit of providing the best education possible for our students. And just to reiterate, we, for President Derringer, we will discuss board member compensation, policy 1.17 at the next board meeting, regardless of whether we're going to change it or not. Or whether we're gonna change midstream and follow policy 1.17. And then we might discuss the administrative guideline on enrolling eligible students. And we will be looking at all the high school handbooks at the July regular board meeting. There is no July policy committee meeting. Our next policy and facilities committee meetings are scheduled for August 3rd. Is that accurate? Okay. All right, so
I have one clarifying thing. All school level handbooks at the next meeting, even though the high school is what we reviewed tonight, because they changed the most.
Correct,
At the next meeting, we will be reviewing all school levels.
we will have a lot of reading to do to prepare for the
Including
meeting.
including a bunch of them.
And what we'll probably do, to be honest, like we'll give you a high level overview over all of our in those as well, and we'll make sure that they are available to you guys, whether we don't go page by page, but we'll make sure they are readily available, and that way you can see them.
If I could ask, if we could capture the changes, again, like we
I'm
have the
thinking
edits
kind of
here.
what we do for program of
For
studies,
sure.
when we capture the changes.
Yeah, the strike through and red text is
And then we
helpful.
always create like a table where we capture them, would that be helpful?
100%,
Okay.
that's exactly what I was hoping for. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, sorry.
Right, I'm glad you clarified that, so we'll see you all in August, meeting's adjourned at 6:20. Everybody gets a break for the policy, or facilities.
I know.
You send it to me too.